Hey Margaret, it's Robert. I'm really, really, really lonely and wish I could see you, just, just so I could have a friend.
Once there was an ugly barnacle.
Anyway, Patrick, Victor Frankenstein starts to talk about his background, where he was born, his childhood. Then he starts to describe a childhood friend, Elizabeth Lavenza, a girl that his family had adopted and would be his wife. He then described his fascination with alchemy and the works of Cornelius Agrippa. He then goes to the university at Ingolstadt. He then sets up a meeting with Monsieur Crimp, who tells him that all of his previous work is pointless. After that, he attends a lecture from a nice professor named Waldman. He decides to pursue his passion. He studies tirelessly and ostracizes himself from his family. He then starts to build his creation. One stormy night, he finally completes his creature. When he sees it, he is horrified and runs into the next room. He awakens to see the monster looming over his bed. He leaves the house, and the next morning he comes across his friend, Henry Clerval. Victor then becomes ill for many months. Elizabeth writes a letter expressing her concern about Victor's well-being. She also mentions that Justine Moritz has returned to the household. When Victor has recovered, he introduces Henry to his professors. Just the sight of chemistry equipment is enough to make Victor ill. Victor receives a letter saying that his brother William has been murdered. He leaves to Geneva. On his way there, he walks by the spot where his brother was murdered and sees the monster. He then held the monster responsible for the death of his brother. Justine is then accused of murdering William and confesses to the crime. She thinks that she will be pardoned for confessing, but she is executed. Victor now feels guilty for the death of two family members. He becomes melancholy and thinks about changing his name.
And his name is John C.
One rainy day, he decides to travel to the summit of Montenvert. When he gets to the top, he sees a huge creature racing toward him and realizes it's the monster. He is frightened and gives the monster threats. He somehow is persuaded by the monster to go into a cave and build a campfire. The monster tells about his story from the moment he is created. He tells how he starts to steal food from a hovel and observes the people living there are having hardship. He then realizes that they can somehow communicate using sounds. He learns the language enough to speak a little. He watches them and admires their beauty and sees himself in a mirror and is shocked. Spring is setting in, and a woman named Sophie moves into the cottage. She does not speak the language, and as she learns, the monster learns also. The monster becomes fluent. He decides to present himself one day to the cottagers. He is accepted at first by a blind man, but as soon as the others show up, he is shunned away by the rest of the cottagers. After this, a monster swears to bring revenge to the human race, especially Victor Frankenstein. The monster explains how the confrontation with his brother William went. He explains how he strangles the boy to death after Alphonse Frankenstein is mentioned. He then explains how he planted evidence in Justine Moritz's dress. The monster then asks what Victor thinks about making him a female companion. Victor initially says no, but is convinced by the monster to create a female friend. Victor and his dad then arrange a trip to England. While he's there, he contemplates all the demented little demons that the offspring of the monster and his female counterpart could produce. He gets rid of the female monster's body parts when confronted by the monster. Then the monster tells him that he will be visiting Victor on his wedding night. He then is confronted and accused of a murder. He is shocked to learn that it's his friend, Henry Clerval. He does some jail time but is eventually released. He returns home and begins planning his wedding. As his wedding day gets closer and closer, he feels more nervous by the day. The wedding happens, and the monster's nowhere to be seen. The monster is the only thing that Victor can think about for the whole night. He starts to look for the monster, then hears Elizabeth scream. He then realizes that he was not the one that the monster was looking to kill. He decides to dedicate the rest of his life to finding and killing the monster. His search leads him to the ice and snow of the north. He then begins to tell Walton his story. One morning, Walton's crew members beg him to promise that they would go back to England if they were to break out of the ice. Victor then gives a speech and convinces them that the honor of their journey should motivate them to keep trekking along. They are motivated only for Victor to die only 2 days after his speech. A few days after Victor's death, the monster comes to see his master. He is distraught upon the sight of his fallen creator and leaves the ship and runs off into the darkness.